The notice was the first thing I saw when I opened the door, hanging there like a fluorescent slap to the face. It was crooked. Of course it was. Whoever posted it had probably pressed it on with the same vindictive enthusiasm they used when measuring mailbox heights. The wind tugged at the corners, making it flutter like it was excited to ruin my morning. Bright orange, bold black font, the kind of paper that screams before you even read it. I peeled it off slowly, as if maybe, just maybe, the paper would apologize and say it was all a misunderstanding. But no, there it was, printed with bureaucratic confidence. Structural non-compliance. You have 72 hours to remove all unauthorized additions or face daily fines. I stared at the words until they blurred. My ranch wasn't some slapped-together mess. It was my home, my grandfather's before mine, and the workshop they were calling unauthorized had been standing long before the HOA ever sprouted like a weed with a clipboard. My fingers tightened around the notice. I could feel the cheap ink smudging against my thumb. Behind me, my old hound, Rusty, whined softly as if sensing the fuse that had just been lit. I gave him a reassuring pat but kept my eyes on the street because I already knew what I'd find. There he was, Harold, HOA president, power tripper, owner of more pastel polos than any grown man should have. Today he was wearing a mint green one that clashed aggressively with the smugness on his face. He was leaning against his golf cart, the kind of cart that probably had more accessories than my truck, arms crossed, sunglasses perched on his head like he'd just come back from directing traffic on a yacht. He cleared his throat. Saw you found the notice. Oh, did you? I held it up. Hard to miss. Nothing personal, he said, which is exactly the phrase people use right before they do something deeply personal. We're just enforcing community guidelines. Guidelines that didn't exist 6 months ago, I shot back. He shrugged like he was doing me a favor. The board voted on them. It passed unanimously. Because you're the board, another shrugged, this one with even more self-satisfaction. We all agreed that the workshop violates architectural uniformity. I blinked at him. Architectural uniformity? I live on 5 acres. My nearest neighbor is a mailbox. That doesn't change the rules, Harold said, voice slipping into that tone he used when talking to people he assumed were less intelligent than him. The structure is unapproved. Unapproved? I stepped closer. It was built in 1984. You guys didn't show up until 2020. He lifted his chin. And now it's unapproved. The wind carried a whiff of freshly cut grass. Or maybe that was just the scent of hypocrisy. So you expect me to tear it down in 3 days? Harold tapped his clipboard. He always had a clipboard. I suspected he slept with it. 72 hours. After that, fines begin accruing. Daily. And trust me, he gave me a pitying smile. They add up quickly. I could feel the heat rising in my chest, but I kept my voice calm. Too calm. You've been gunning for this place ever since your little community beautification initiative, haven't you? Harold raised a hand, palm out. Let's not make this emotional. Everyone has to comply with the rules. Funny, I muttered. I don't recall you giving yourself a citation for that pink flamingo army you parade around during the holidays. He ignored that. Look, you can appeal to the board at our next meeting, but the clock won't stop while you wait. He slid back into his golf cart like he was some sheriff in a black and white western, ready to ride off after issuing justice. The cart beeped when he reversed, an annoyingly chirpy beep that matched his personality a little too well. Hope you understand, he said, his voice floating back to me, nothing personal, and with that he buzzed away, leaving a faint trail of dust and self-righteousness behind him. I stood in the driveway, still holding the notice. My ranch stretched out behind me, the weathered fence line, the old oak tree that had survived 3 generations of storms, the workshop with its tin roof and wooden beams, smelling faintly of sawdust and oil. My father taught me how to use a hammer inside that building. My grandfather had carved his initials into the corner post. I'd spent summers fixing engines, crafting furniture, and hiding from the world in there, unauthorized. The word echoed in my head like an insult. I folded the notice carefully, deliberately, and slid it into my back pocket. Rusty padded to my side, leaning against my leg. I rested my hand on his head, feeling the familiar warmth of him grounding me. So that's how it's gonna be, I murmured. I looked at the workshop, at the ranch, at every nail and board and memory. And then I looked down the road where Harold had disappeared, probably already drafting the next pointless rule about how many pumpkins were allowed on porches in October. They thought they could scare me into compliance, push me around, make me tear down a piece of my history because it didn't match their cookie-cutter dream of uniform fences and pre-approved shutters. But standing there in the morning sun, something shifted inside me. Not anger. Anger was too small. This was resolve. Cold, steady, focused. The kind that didn't shout or slam doors. The kind that made plans. They wanted a fight? Fine. But I wasn't going to pick up a hammer. I wasn't going to touch a single nail. I wasn't going to tear down one damn thing. Instead, I was about to dismantle something else. Their control. I whistled for Rusty and walked back toward the workshop, each step fueled by a growing certainty. The HOA thought they held all the cards. They forgot something important. I had resources they didn't know about, connections they didn't see coming, a few legal advantages they never bothered to check because they assumed every homeowner was powerless. And they really shouldn't have given me a deadline. Nothing motivates a man quite like being told he can't protect what's his. By the time the sun set behind the ridge that night, I had a plan taking shape, something bold, precise, and devastating in its simplicity. Harold had started a clock. He had no idea I was about to flip it over and drop it on his head. By the time I pushed open the double doors to the HOA meeting room, the place was already humming with tension. The room wasn't large, just a converted community center lined with framed photos of smiling families at block parties. But tonight, it felt like the walls themselves were leaning in to hear the chaos. Every folding chair was filled. Homeowners packed the aisles, clutching flyers and muttering angrily under their breath. Someone's baby cried. Someone else shushed them. The air conditioner rattled like it was begging to be excused from the drama. At the center table sat the HOA board, 5 people who took themselves far too seriously for a group that spent most of their time debating mailbox colors. And at the head was Harold. He slammed the gavel down so hard the table jumped. "Order! We will have order!" he barked, his voice cracking like a teenager's mid-puberty. "We need to address the matter of blatant homeowner refusal to comply with mandated code enforcement." I leaned against the doorway, unseen for just a moment longer, watching his temple veins throb. He had no idea I'd been busy during those 72 hours. No idea how thoroughly I'd dismantled his kingdom. No idea what was about to hit him. I let my voice carry across the room. "Talking about me already? I'm flattered." The entire room pivoted toward me. A wave of whispers rippled through the crowd, some surprised, some relieved, some downright eager to see what circus act was about to unfold. Harold froze mid-gavel stroke, then slowly lowered it, trying to regain some shred of authority. His face shifted from red to pale and back again like a defective heat lamp. You weren't on the agenda," he stammered. "I don't need to be," I said as I walked to the table. "Turns out I've got some new responsibilities myself." I tossed the stack of documents onto the polished laminate surface, and they fanned out like a deck of very expensive playing cards. Harold reached for them with trembling fingers. His eyes darted across the page once, twice, then widened like someone had just pulled the brakes on his whole life. No, this can't be right." "Oh, it's right," I said casually. "Some light bedtime reading. Deeds, titles, property transfers." The board members scrambled to read over his shoulder. A couple gasped. One woman made a squeaking sound like a startled mouse. I took my time circling around the table, savoring every second of Harold's unraveling. "You look confused," I said. "Let me help." I placed my hand on the back of his chair, leaning slightly so the whole room could hear. "The land your HOA office sits on used to belong to the developer." Harold's voice quivered. "Used to?" "Yeah," I said. "Used to, past tense. Until 3 days ago." He shook his head sharply like that would somehow shake the truth off the paper. Why would the developer sell these parcels? They're critical to HOA operation. One man's critical is another man's liquid asset. I shrugged. Your beloved developer had, let's call them financial motivations. I made an offer, he took it. End of story. Chaos erupted. People stood up. Some clapped. Others shouted questions. One guy near the back yelled, "Does this mean we don't have to pay dues anymore?" While another yelled, "Raise his rent next." Harold slammed the gavel repeatedly, sounding more like a woodpecker than a leader. "Order! Order! Sit down! All of you, sit down!" He managed to force a shaky silence back into the room. His voice dropped to a ragged whisper. "This is outrageous. You can't just buy the land under the HOA headquarters." I smiled. "I can." And I did. He blinked rapidly, trying to regroup. This violates every principle of good governance. No, I corrected. This violates your illusion of control. The rest of us? We're fine. He swallowed hard, and for the first time since I'd known him, he didn't look like a smug executive of the suburban universe. He looked like a man standing on a rug that was suddenly missing from beneath him. I leaned forward, planting both hands on the table. And now, Harold, you work for me. A gasp shot through the room. What? He croaked. That office you're sitting in? The meeting room? The storage shed with all the holiday decor you hoard like a dragon? Even the parking lot you patrol like a mall cop with a hero complex? I tapped the documents. It's mine now. Harold rose halfway from his seat, speechless. His lip quivered like he was debating whether to cry or faint. Maybe both. And since you're now leasing those properties, I continued, we need to discuss your new rental terms. One of the board members asked timidly, What are you proposing? I straightened up, slid my hands into my pockets, and delivered the line I'd rehearsed since the moment that orange notice crumpled in my fist. Effective immediately, I said, Your rent is tripled. The room went nuclear. People whooped. Someone shouted, Call it justice tax. A few residents laughed loud enough to be heard in the next county. Harold looked like he'd been struck by lightning. You can't do that, he sputtered. I can, I said. And I did. Triple? He shook the pages as if expecting the numbers to rearrange themselves into something less horrifying. This is extortion. No, I corrected calmly. This is market value. It's what the developer was planning to raise your lease to next fiscal year. I simply expedited the process. He sank back down into his chair as though the weight of every petty rule he'd ever written finally collapsed on top of him. And don't worry, I added. You have 72 hours to pay. His head snapped up. 72 hours? He whispered. Funny how fast that clock moves, isn't it? Silence fell. A different kind of silence. Heavy. I let it linger long enough for the words to settle like dust in the rafters. I turned toward the door. Rusty waited outside, tail thumping. Before leaving, I glanced back at Harold and the board, all pale faces and trembling hands. Don't be late, I said. Wouldn't want you to rack up any daily fines. And then I walked out, the cheers of homeowners rising behind me like a chorus, leaving the HOA to choke on the taste of their own rules. But this time under my terms,